This is Who Makes a Podcast? Conversations with your favorite podcast hosts about who they are, the shows they make, and why they make them. I'm your host, Chris Cookley, and my guest today is Andrew Kerr. Andrew is the founder of FiBuyRia.com and a seasoned real estate investor and nonprofit director. With his successes in real estate, he decided to share his experiences in his podcast, the House Hacking Podcast. After working in residential and small commercial banking for nearly 7 years, he knew it wasn't his passion. Because of his financial success in real estate investing, he was able to pursue his true passions, nonprofit work, and traveling the world. In this episode, we talk about what house hacking is, SEO and growth through organic search for a podcast, and the Goldilocks guest selection, getting a small guest, a medium guest, a big guest, and how different guests serve different purposes for your audience and your growth. We also talk about how Andrew uses a team to edit his episodes and speed up his process, and he answers his own famous 6 questions at the end. And now here is my conversation with Andrew Kerr. Andrew, welcome to Who Makes a Podcast?
Chris, man, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk with you this evening.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. I was telling you beforehand, I came across you listening to another podcast, All the Hacks with Chris Hutchins. And, that's how I came to know who you are and started listening to your podcast, which is great. For my listeners who don't know about you, could you tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from originally and where you are now?
Yeah, born in California, grew up in North Carolina, and then have been in New Orleans, Louisiana for 6 years, 7 years, something like that. When I got out of high school, I took the alternative route of not going to college. And at 20 years old, this is back in 2002, I'm a sort of older millennial. I ended up buying my first home, was a partner in a mortgage company by 23, and then had that sort of quarter life crisis and ended up in the nonprofit sector. I went from making great money to making no money. And that's when I really sort of built up a real estate portfolio and then started documenting some of what I was doing via the website. And that's sort of what led to the podcast that we're going to talk about today.
How did you end up in New Orleans? What brought you there?
It was a little bit of a mix. So, my wife and I both loved the city. She had volunteered here, a ton after Katrina. I loved the city. Even before we knew each other, we just sort of loved the city. And then around 6, 7 years ago, I got recruited to work for a nonprofit in charge of this multi-state territory. And they said, we'd love for you to come work with us. And you can live anywhere in this multi-state territory. Is essentially from Chicago all the way down to the Gulf Coast. And being a young couple in love, New Orleans, the food, the culture, the music. Yeah. I mean, great place to live.
Do you have a favorite neighborhood in New Orleans? I've been once, and it was a long weekend, and it was a ton of fun. But we didn't get to see too much of the city.
Yeah, it changes. So originally when we moved here, we're in the Lower Garden District. Of course, you love that. Then we are in Uptown, and now we're in the Marigny Bywater area. So it seems like we end up loving whatever part of the city we spend the most time in.
Yeah, probably one of the best sandwiches I've ever had was in New Orleans. And I can't remember the name of the place, but it was like a little convenience store almost on a corner somewhere. And they had a little po' boy shop in the back of the store, and it was phenomenal.
Yeah, we have tons of little shops like that.
How did you decide that house hacking was something that you wanted to do? Was it just familiarity with the mortgage industry and real estate because of that angle? How did you decide to pursue house hacking?
It was all by accident. So, back when I sort of bought my first house, this is 2002. The internet's just barely growing. You don't have websites and podcasts like you do today. And I was literally at this point where here I am, 19, 20 years old, working in the mortgage industry with a guy that said, hey, you're killing it. You're hungry. You're ambitious. Why don't you keep learning? Then I started doing the loan officer sales side of it. And something just clicked one day where I realized, wait, I'm doing loan paperwork for folks who are going out and buying a house and their mortgage payment is cheaper than what I would pay for rent. So, talk with my folks a bit, they gave me some advice, and I ended up buying a townhouse. And oddly enough, when I went to buy this townhouse, it was a new construction community. They had like 5 or 6 different floor plans you could choose from. I chose the floor plan that was geared towards, the 55 and 60-year olds and older.
Uh-huh.
It had a first floor master bedroom. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is the one I want. And they're like, no, no, no. That's usually for the older folks that don't want to walk up the steps. And I was like, no, this is the one I want. And they're like, okay. But to me, it was like, I can live downstairs in the master bedroom, and then the 2 bedrooms upstairs, I can rent it to my friend, and they'll cover, half the mortgage plus, chip in for some utilities. And that would be cheaper than what I was paying and would pay in rent if we were living together. And he could have sort of a bedroom and living room upstairs, and then we'd only be sharing the kitchen space. And that's really how I got started. And now I've done 4 house hacks. The last 2, and our current one was with my wife. And it was just something that we've always come back to as a way to keep your living costs low while you build other wealth. And for me, house hacking gave me the opportunity to travel, gave me the opportunity to do nonprofit work. It gave me the ability to save capital to invest in other types of real estate.
And what would you say, if somebody's not familiar with this at all, how would you define what a house hack is? Like it seems like it could be a fairly broad term. So what would you say qualifies as a house hack?
Yeah, the way I really simplify it is you just make a slightly different choice with your housing. So your housing generates some sort of income to offset your living costs. And, on our show, we break down sort of the 6 main ways to do it. But, the idea is, for me in that very first one was, hey, I've got a 3-bedroom place. I'm going to rent out half of it to offset part of my living costs. And then my second house hack was a 4-bedroom, 4-bath condo near a university. I rented out the 3 rooms, and that actually generated more than my mortgage. So I actually had cash flow, and then turned that into a long-term rental. Then we went on to an older corner store that we converted into multiple high-end apartments with an outside building that we rented. And it's basically, again, you're making a choice with your housing, so that property, no matter the shape, size, location, how you want to do it, it just generates some sort of income, so your overall living costs are lower than they would normally be.
So you were house hacking maybe before you even knew that term.
Yeah. To me, it was just this, hey, me and my buddy can go rent a place. I can own a place for cheaper. And then I know there's these other benefits that I didn't really know the extent of them, but I was like, oh yeah, I get a write-off for mortgage interest, and, you get the write-off property taxes, and then debt pay down. And, at the time I knew it was some sort of benefit, but again, I just didn't understand the extent of it.
And you're in New Orleans. New Orleans got hit with a Category 4 hurricane. Was it last year? How are your house hacks, or how's your house doing down there after that happened? Did you get hit with that?
We did, luckily nothing. Oddly enough, the year before, we actually had some water damage from a hurricane, but it was pretty minimal stuff. We had like yard cleanup and had to readjust some doors, and a little bit of water where some like flashing had blown off and some shingles had come up, but nothing to the point where it was serious enough where we actually had to file an insurance claim, $200, where, on the other side of the city, people were losing their roofs to a little further west, whole homes were being destroyed.
Well, that's good that you dodged that. Do you have a renter living with you now? Is that how your current hack works?
Yeah. So in the Bywater historic area near the French Quarter, we bought this property for about $380,000. It was a duplex. So basically, it was divided in half: a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom on one side, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom on the other side. And when we bought it, one side was empty, one side had a tenant in it. So we did some of the exterior renovations, and we renovated the downstairs, and then fenced off the backyard. So that way we each had our own private outdoor space. And then now we're actually in the middle of renovating the other side as that tenant moved out. And then we'll be, as that place is renovated, we'll be able to increase the rents quite a bit on that place to where the other side will cover almost all of our mortgage. So, we'll be living in a $700,000 house for $200, $300 a month.
Yeah, that's hard to beat.
Yeah.
That's good math to have for you. Are you typically flipping like one property into another, like you're selling one to buy the next one, or are you just stacking properties on top of each other?
It's changed over the years, and I actually sold off almost all of my portfolio back in 2016. So, a lot of folks, when they think about real estate investing, they think it's, something that's hard and set and you have to do forever. And the same thing with house hacking is, oh, if I do house hacking, then I have to become a real estate investor. I started with student housing and affordable housing. The student housing was because I was in my 20s and a lot of my friends were students, and that seemed like a tenant base I could relate with. The affordable housing side is from doing the nonprofit work and doing community development and rebuilding in places like Haiti and Indonesia and the Philippines to, slums of Nairobi, Kenya. I said, okay, great. The poor communities back in North Carolina is like, I can set myself apart from the slumlords and make good money and treat people well. And this would be an easy niche from me. And then as time progressed, there in 2016, I peaked at 40 units between some condos,
Wow.
duplexes, quadruplexes. I was able to become an accredited investor. And then I started selling off a lot of my portfolio to invest in bigger deals that were run by other people. So that way I didn't have to put in so much time and work into managing all my own properties.
So 40 units, and you're in your late 30s now. That makes me wonder a little bit about debt. So how do you feel about leveraging debt to buy real estate? Do you have a threshold that you're comfortable with as far as how much of a property you would be comfortable financing versus actually like having the cash to put down on it?
Yeah, so I always hate the answer of it depends,
Yeah.
but
Well,
it
it
really
does.
does depend, right? So, in my 20s, I didn't have a problem being leveraged. Literally, I was like taking money out of an old 401k, taking money out of an IRA. I was trying to do 100% financing. I used up every cash I had to buy properties to where I had no cash left to continue buying. Then I started partnering with folks. I did, hard money plus a private second loan. So that was 100% in. And then, as I started to get in my 30s, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, we started getting more serious. You had more to lose potentially in a risk. And I started saying, I don't need to be as risky anymore. So, I went from didn't matter about debt and as far as the percentage. And I said, if I'm 27 and I go bankrupt, big deal, I can start over again. Where now it's like, okay, great. I got a wife and we've got a lot of stuff built up. We don't want to be that high risk. And then, so it's changed over time. And I think that's perfectly fine for everyone. What you're comfortable with one day, you might not be comfortable with, next month or next year, or 10 years down the road. And the others definitely also on the property. So if the property has a lot of upside potential in it, I don't mind doing 100% financing or doing like a hard money financing, a higher rate with more points, a more expensive loan if it lets me move quicker and that single property is more leveraged just so I can get into the deal and then I'm creating equity. So, partly what we did with the third house hack in uptown New Orleans, it was this old rundown abandoned corner store. I think we bought it for like 270 to 275. We put about $250,000 into it. I was essentially 100% financed on it,
Hmm.
but we created, at that time, I think we increased the value by 50, 60 grand. So by the time we were done, we weren't 100% leveraged. And then it was also a great cash flowing property. So, in the short term, I don't mind being very leveraged on a single property, but sort of across my whole net worth. Now I'm very, I guess, conservative on my risk tolerance. I don't want to be over leveraged.
Your website is FIBYREA. Is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah.
So that's FIBYREI, and that stands for Financial Independence by Real Estate Investing. Is that correct?
Yep.
You have 5 goals that you have listed on your website that I'm going to read real quickly, which be invested in 3 to 5 metro statistical areas, produce returns of 12.5%, produce enough cash flow to enable an early retirement overseas, somewhere like Central America or Southeast Asia, start a donor-advised fund or family foundation, and raise $25 million for charity. How close are you to achieving these goals, and why did you set these particular goals?
Yeah. So, the 3 to 5 areas was, I don't want to be tied all into, at that time, it was North Carolina. I felt North Carolina had tons of upside. I didn't think it was going anywhere, especially in the middle of the state. There'd be the occasional hurricane every 8 or 9 years, but it was pretty safe geographic area, had a lot of potential, but you never know what could happen 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So part of it was to diversify geographically, still be heavily invested in real estate. That one's definitely hit. The 12.5%, to me, that was just, there's two parts to it. One is I know if I'm investing in real estate, whatever cash I have in has a 12.5% return, or my total return's 12.5%. That'll let me double my money every about 6 years. And I knew I had this sort of longer term net worth goal I wanted to get to. And I said, well, here's where I'm at. If I can double this money every 6 years, I'll be there, where I want to be in my mid 40s.
Yep.
Cash flow, we're set on that. That's an easy one to do. And especially now that, we're still house hacking. Right now, we're covering the mortgage while we're renovating, but that'll cover essentially all of our costs. My wife and I were just talking the other day about, doing a long sabbatical and trying out a place in Central America, because we can rent out our side and, bring in 2,500, $3,000 a month in cash flow. And that would more than cover, just this one property would more than cover a place for us to live in Central America or Asia, and, get us a decent place in parts of Europe. I haven't done the full donor advice fund yet, and then raised $25 million for charity. I've just finished up a big contract with one nonprofit. I'm totaling up, but I think I'm somewhere around over my decade working in the nonprofit industry, about $22 million that I've raised for those charities. So almost to that goal.
So you're going to have to set some new goals pretty soon then.
I know. That's the good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
Like you eventually hit your goals, then you got to find more to come up with.
Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah. Oddly enough, I'm thinking about getting back into affordable housing. There's a couple buddies of mine. We're all real estate investors. One's a doctor at a children's hospital. One's a social worker. And then with my wife and a couple other friends that have also done well, that could potentially be investors, and going back into affordable housing, one, because you can make a decent return investing in that area, but two is just really, it's a way to make a positive impact in the community. Across the US, there's affordable housing issues. So it's sort of to me, looks like a good business to start for both financial reasons and then a social impact reason. And one of the things we've actually been looking at is, as we set that up as a B Corp or a benefit corporation. If you or any of your readers are familiar with that model, it basically says you have to meet a certain amount of standards where you think things through, like who are your vendors, your supply chain, are you sourcing materials ethically, where they want you to be a profitable corporation, but your goal as a business isn't just a responsibility to the investors and shareholders. It's to investors, shareholders, communities, employees. So it has this more holistic approach to running a business, and they actually certify you as a B Corp or benefit corporation.
Okay, so not just straight capitalism then.
Yeah, it's a blend between being a nonprofit and being a straight
for-profit
capitalist for-profit business.
Cool. That sounds like a great goal. I'm sure you'll do something like that if that's what you want to do. Your podcast is the House Hacking Podcast, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But I'm curious what it was about podcasting that drew you in. Like what gets you excited about making a podcast?
Yeah. So initially, oddly enough, I wanted a way to generate more traffic to my website. My website,
yeah,
I think the first version was in 2017, which I scrapped and then rebooted in 2018 with its current name. So it had been around a lot longer, and I hated writing. And I said, well, great. I don't mind talking with folks. Like, I'll go grab a coffee or a beer with a friend and we can talk about real estate for hours. So my thought was, okay, that's a good medium for me. Video was definitely really starting to come up, but I was like, I don't want to be on camera all the time and, have to brush your hair and, worry about the appearance side of things. So I was like, okay, podcast audio version, that's a great way to go. And then I looked at it as a way also to just build authority for the 5 by RIA brand.
And is that still the primary purpose of the podcast? Is it a majority purpose to share information with other real estate investors, or are you trying to drive leads to the website?
Yeah, so there was two parts. I mean, there was like the business side of it of, hey, here's a website, we're expanding the brand, we're trying to drive traffic and leads. I always thought I wouldn't be able to, because house hacking is such a niche in the real estate investing world. I never thought I would be big enough to attract sponsors. So I always thought like the monetization strategy was to just drive traffic to the website, which was then, we had products and affiliate links and all that good stuff. But I specifically wanted to talk about house hacking because the question I always got was, Andrew, what's the easiest way, the quickest way, the best way to get started in real estate investing? And my answer was always house hacking. And I sort of got tired of talking about it with folks and repeating the same conversation. So I was like, this would be a great podcast to start because it's such an easy way to get into real estate investing. So why don't we come in and document other people's stories? That way the listeners can hear the best practices of how they did it. And then one of the other things when I was starting the show, I really wanted to do, even today, most of the real estate shows are white guys talking to white guys. And there's tons of amazing people killing it in real estate investing. And at that time, at the end of 2019, it was even more so. Like the biggest podcasts out there were white guys interviewing other white guys.
Yep.
I made a specific emphasis of like, I can't do anything about myself, but let me make sure at least half of my guests are female. That first season, we ended up having about 60% of the audience was actually female real estate investors that were just absolutely crushing it. And they had a lot of successes. They had a lot of failures. They shared, the ups, the downs. I mean, we had one woman on the show. I love her to death. She was so open and vulnerable about how the whole process basically caused her and her boyfriend to go into couples therapy together because they were renovating a home and all of that stress. And, now they're married. So it was obviously a good experience for them in the end. But that purpose of the show to help folks and try to broaden the voice was something that I was intentionally trying to do just because I wanted to hear those experiences for myself. And I thought others could find them useful. But that actually I found helped really drive the show.
That's awesome. I mean, you seem like a genuinely really good guy, with all the things that you're trying to do. So that's really cool.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Has your podcast influenced how you're running your house hacks in any way?
Not really. So most of the conversations I've had with folks that are in their house hack, they're sort of in their first 1 to 5 years of real estate and of investing experience. Where now, I think I'm at 19 years of doing this since I bought my first property to now. So the experience level is quite different. I've used my experience to help guide those questions and know, hey, you just glossed over something. I want to poke at that and prod at that a little bit more because that's something really, really valuable that you just mentioned for folks to listen to. There are some occasional golden nuggets that have helped me where a new platform has come up about doing tenant screening or property management software. And that's let me actually try out some of that stuff. And when it's worked out well, I've come back and share that with the listeners of the show.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you if there, obviously you're coming at it from maybe a more experienced place than your guests are. But, what would be maybe one of the best pieces of knowledge that you've gained from a guest that you might not have had before you did your podcast?
It's that like unwillingness to give up and quit. A lot of them were like, I don't know. It was across almost all of the guests, 80-90% of the guests. It was like, I don't know everything. I know a little bit. I just have to get started, where you learn so much more when you're actually doing the process. And that's not only real estate investing. I think that's everything. Like you could read every article about running a podcast. You can take courses on it, but until you actually like boot up the computer, plug in the mic, and then you realize you have audio issues or, my first season, I said awesome, probably like 52 times per episode. And I was like, okay, I got to break this little audio verbal tick.
Yeah.
And those are things until you get started, you're never going to be 100% ready. And that's something that I really admired of all of the guests.
So you're on season 4, season 5, something like that. How long have you been podcasting? Has it been since 2017 or 2018? Whenever you rebranded the site, has the podcast been around since the beginning?
We launched December, I think it was 30th. It was a Monday of 2019. So I actually started,
Okay.
my goal with the first season was to actually record all 20 episodes. And I had it really mapped out I actually had the first 5 seasons sort of mapped out of what I wanted to cover through the processes, where not to just dump everything on people all at once, but sort of have it as a discovery process for folks and get deeper and deeper as the seasons go on. That first season, I recorded all 20 guests and then aired it after that, which was both a good thing and then a bad thing.
Why did you decide to go with seasons rather than episodic, just a continuous line of episodes coming out?
Some of it is maybe I was a little bit lazy.
In what way?
Well, part of it is recording a podcast takes work. A lot of folks think that are like, oh yeah, I want to do a podcast. I don't think they understand the amount of work that goes into it. We're trying to find guests, make sure the guest actually has an interesting story and they're good at having a conversation and talking. And then you actually have to do the recording. You got to do some prep work. Then afterwards, the post-production process. It's not something that, you talk to someone for 45 minutes, an hour, and then you're good to go. There's prep before and after. It definitely takes time. And I realized just from running the website that I don't want to have that pressure and also that responsibility of doing it every single week, 50, weeks out of the year, 52 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
And as my wife and I were maturing and our portfolio were starting to sell off, a lot of it was we were trying to be a bit more intentional with my life. I mean, my wife still says I take on too many projects, but the idea of like, do I really want to take on a project where I've got to have an episode coming out every single week? I didn't want that. And that's where I joke where a little bit of intentional laziness. So I like the idea that I could put a lot of energy and effort on making a season really great. And then I could have some time off and then I could think about what worked well, what didn't, and then start planning the next season.
You mentioned among a long list of things that it takes to put a podcast together, which I am very quickly discovering, finding guests and making sure you can have a good conversation with them and that they have an interesting story. Where are you finding your guests that do these house hacks, and how are you doing that vetting? What's that process look like?
It's changed. And I think this is probably going to be a common thing that comes up with all the questions that you've been asking me and probably will ask me, is it's changed over time. So, the first season, while the website was starting to get some traction, the podcast wasn't out there. So getting guests to come on a show that they've never heard of was a little bit, they were like, okay, who are you? And, why do you want to talk to me? I just did outreach through, forums. So tons of Facebook groups that I was part of, whether it was a personal finance forum or a real estate investing forum. I just started searching other folks that had done a house hack. And then I also went out to my friends and folks that I had a sort of a previous relationship with. And I said, hey, I'm trying to launch this for a season. You've got a really good story. Remember that time I helped you out? Would you help me out here and be a guest on my show? They would say yes, but a lot of it was just searching out in the forums. And that gave me a way to sort of look up some background on folks and say, okay, yeah, here's their story. They talked about it at a couple posts. They did some posts on questions or challenges that they were running into. And that sort of helped me figure out, would they be a good guest? Is there an interesting story? Because I didn't want every story to be 100% successful. We wanted to pull out some of those failures or challenges because that's where people learn from. Like, I hate those real estate podcast stories where it's like, I went from 0 to 3,000 units in, 16 months. It was like, okay, yeah, that's like a 1 in a million story. There might be some lessons learned, but, I want that average person that did it and had challenges because more people are going to relate to that story. And now where I'm at, we're recording season 4 right now. I don't have to really do anything. It's basically, I get DMs of folks asking to share their story. I get DMs of saying like, hey, my buddy just did this. I've heard your show. He would have a really good story. Past guests refer over folks. So as far as when I'm interviewing folks that have done the house hack, I've got more folks than I could probably interview in a season. We're also doing more technical episodes. We started in season 3. So like we interviewed a CPA to specifically talk about the tax and accounting benefits and potential downfalls or challenges with real estate investing and house hacking. We've brought on founders of property management software companies. We had someone from Furnish Finder, is a platform where you can rent out to travel nurses. We had that founder come on. So we've tried to have those more technical guests to be as resources for everyone listening that wants to get into real estate investing. And those ones I've done more vetting and outreach for. And those were from companies and products that I've used.
So you're probably spending more time vetting guests at this point than you are finding guests. Is there anything in particular that you're like, if somebody DMs you and says, I have a story I want to tell you, do you ask them for additional information? Do you have a spreadsheet or a document somewhere that you're keeping track of all these people in?
Yeah, so I have a VA virtual assistant that I've used for a couple years. I've gone through a couple over the period of time, but the basics that I'll have is when someone reaches out, we ask them to just email a summary to Andrew. So, I'll get that and it's, hey, could you give us like a paragraph or two on your experience?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll get that, whether I'm getting the DM and asking them to email it or my VA is, I'll look at it and then that'll give me sort of a sense. And then I want to go to their social media, and that tells me a lot. So are they doing an outreach specifically because they're trying to promote their own brand, which I'm okay with, but you can tell a lot about, reading through someone's social media. Do they seem genuine? Do they seem disingenuous? Are they really, someone that likes to brag and flex? That's not the type of person that I want on my show. So, looking through someone's social media, it sort of gives me an idea of their personality, what their character's like. And that's really the basic vetting that we do. And then if I'm unsure or want some more information, I'll ask a little more details, and I'll send over a basic set of questions that we ask. I try to really dig in on the guest's unique experience, but we try to cover a core set of questions of like how they find the property, how do they find tenants, did they do any renovation, the purchase price, how they financed it, things like that are sort of common between all the guests.
How far out in advance are you looking at guests or trying to book guests? Like, how long does that process take you from the time somebody DMs you or messages you to the time that you're actually sitting down to record that interview with them?
If I got the opening in my calendar, and it's a guest that I think would be a really good fit, I'll do the interview sometime, in the next day or two.
Okay.
Especially if there's a bigger guest that I really want to get on the show, or a CEO of a company, or a founder of a company, I'll flex my schedule to them versus other guests. I'll sort of send them a Calendly link and say, okay, great, you can book a time. And like right now I have no recording times open for the next month. And I'm getting ready to block out some time, and then I'll email, I don't know, the 15 or 20 people that I think have interesting stories and say, hey, I've got some recording times open for March. Go ahead and book a time. So yeah, it can be a couple of days to a month out before we actually sit down and do a recording. And then the air date could be another month or two after that.
And then do you do any additional research on your guests, or are you just going into it with the summary that they've given you, and then you have kind of a core set of questions that you try to work through every guest?
Yeah, just those core set of questions. I like it just to be a bit of a natural conversation. I'll look at some of their stuff on social media where if they've done posts about their house hacking story, was there a property fire or a flood? One of the persons I interviewed, I saw on their social media where they talked about they had some flooding in their kitchen. So that was like a note that I made of like, oh, this is something we definitely want to ask about. But otherwise, I just try to have a conversation with folks on the spot.
Do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
I used to, and then when COVID hit, I really tried to learn video and photography, and then learning editing with Premiere Pro. So I essentially stopped listening to podcasts and Like, I think before 2020, I would maybe watch 2-3 hours of YouTube a year. And, I would be listening to 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours of podcasts a week at that time. And now it's no podcasts unless someone recommends a specific episode of something that they know would relate well with where I'm at in life.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's, deep diving on YouTube with, folks like Daniel Schiffer, Peter McKinnon,
Yeah.
Chris and Becky, people that are sort of filmmakers, because I'm really trying to learn that space.
Yeah. Peter McKinnon's great. I love his channel. Yeah, you can really dive down the YouTube rabbit hole, and there's a lot of really great content. I feel like there was a time maybe recently where someone would say, I watch a lot of YouTube, and somebody might react like, oh, you're wasting a bunch of time. But no, there's a lot of great education to be had on there for free, which is great.
Yeah, there really is.
So did you have anybody in mind, any sort of podcast host or show that you were thinking about emulating or that influenced the way that you are making your podcast now?
Yeah, I really liked the Choose Fi guys in especially their earlier, first 50, 100 episodes of. I really liked how they sort of gave an update. They had this sort of what I felt like was a good natural conversation between the two of them, and then with their guests. But the person that, oddly enough, I was sort of looking up to or wanted to emulate actually wasn't another podcast host, was a boss I had, years ago named David. He just had this natural curiosity about people, and he could sit down with someone and literally talk to them for 3 hours, and they would walk away just blown away of like, oh my God, like he was really curious. He asked all these great questions. He seemed like he was super interested. And he just had this he was charismatic, but natural curiosity. And that's something that I wanted to emulate of, well, if I actually get really curious, even though that this entry-level real estate investing, it's been a while since I've done it, and maybe I won't learn. If I'm extremely curious about why they wanted to do things, I felt that would make a really good show. And like I had mentioned, people ended up, I don't know why, but they ended up sharing so much stuff, like how they went into couples therapy. We had someone else that she basically said on the show, because of house hacking that got her into real estate investing, that was why she felt she basically lived through fighting off breast cancer.
Wow.
Is because that set her up financially to then have the resources and wherewithal to actually, have less stress in her life and have that financial resources to get the great medical care. And having, I think, that curiosity with your guests can end up making a great show.
Yeah, I think that's probably necessary on a certain level. If you're going to be doing an interview show, if you're going to be asking questions of somebody, you have to be interested in what they're saying. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty obvious that you're just kind of phoning it in. So yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense for the show that you're making. What about education around actually producing a podcast? Were there any books that you read or videos that you watched that influenced or educated you on how to actually make the show?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember I should have looked it up. It was it's a blog. It's like the podcast blog or something like that. I read every single thing they had. I mean, they probably had like 150 articles at the time. I literally read every single one. Then I went to like Sweetwater, BH, Photo Video, Adorama, and like I read every review about every single mic, what people liked, what people didn't like. I went into forums of like, no, don't use the Scarlett, get a Rodecaster or, condenser mic over dynamic mic. And I just did a super deep dive on it. And then I did a post in one of the financial communities that I was part of. And I said, look, I'm getting ready to start a podcast. I know what I know and I know what I don't know. Like, does anyone have a good editor or anyone that's helped launch a podcast that can specifically help with this? And then I got a couple good recommendations to folks. And I had someone that sort of helped walk me through a equipment list and sort of what I need, how to set up a podcast host, that sort of front end piece. We did a couple test recordings together, and then they did the editing. So part of that is they essentially, I committed to them editing the whole first season, and they in turn sort of helped coach me through those first couple episodes and all the equipment setup.
Nice. So did you not have much of a history maybe with audio recording before deciding to do your podcast?
Not really. I was a failed DJ, and I played trumpet in middle school and a couple years in high school. So there's a tiny music background, but even then, like not really, like nothing recording wise.
Do you think reading the blogs and spending all of that time researching, did you run into any sort of paralysis by analysis or anything like that, where you're spending so much time thinking about doing the thing that you didn't get in and actually start?
Fortunately not. And that analysis paralysis is something that affects a lot of people with real estate investing as well. But my goal was, when I was starting the podcast, like I knew when I wanted to launch it by. I love building strategy and then implementing that strategy. So to me, it was, I've got this period of time where I've got to take in all the information I can, then I got to quickly build a strategy and pull it out. But what I wanted to do when I was doing the deep dive is really distill why podcasts fail, what are the major complaints of podcasts, or why folks don't listen. And there's a lot of things, but I was looking for those little things, levers that you could push that would make a big difference. And one of the most common reasons why people wouldn't listen to a podcast over and over again was bad audio quality. So I realized, okay, that means I need to either have good equipment and then actually spend the time doing editing. So I knew I could speak fairly well. I could do the recording. I could buy some decent equipment, but I knew I couldn't learn the back end in a quick enough time period. So I ended up outsourcing that side of it. But yeah, that was why I didn't look at it as an analysis paralysis. It was, here's a short period of time to distill as much information as possible and figure out what are the little levers that are going to make the biggest impacts, and then use that to build out my strategy.
And your podcast is roughly 2.5 years old. Is that right? End of 2019? And we're recording this at the end of February 2022. How big is your podcast at this point? Like how many weekly listens or downloads are you getting?
Yeah, so right now we're off season, in between seasons, and we're still getting 700 to 800 downloads a week, which is relatively small. As you probably know, the average podcast new episode, based on Lisbon stats, gets like 120 to 140 downloads in a 30-day period. So being in the off season, we're still getting a lot of downloads from our back catalog.
Yeah.
When we're releasing new episodes, our new episodes are getting 1,500 downloads in the first week, and then hitting, more over the next 2-3 weeks. And, our very first episode is still getting, 80 to 100 downloads a month. So overall, I feel like we're doing pretty well, because I knew based on those stats, I would never be a podcast that would get, 100,000 downloads per week. So my goal was, if I could get 2,500 downloads a week, I felt I'd be in a pretty good position. And for me, we hit that easily when we're airing new episodes.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's definitely, I would consider that a successful podcast. I don't know how you define success for your podcast. Almost nobody's going to get YouTube numbers, right? It's just a different kind of platform. So, 700 to 800 a week off season definitely seems like a really good bit of momentum going into the next season. How do you stay motivated to continue making new episodes? Like, is it still fun going into, you're making season 4? Are you still enjoying it? Can you see yourself doing it for kind of the long term?
Yeah. So the specific podcast, I don't think it'll be long term. One of my goals when I was starting is, I sort of thought there was 4 or 5 seasons, 100, 150 episodes, maybe 200. But because it was a entry level way to get into real estate investing, I sort of felt like you could only talk about it so much. And I try to make a lot of the episodes as evergreen as possible. And then, the podcast could essentially stop, or you do some updates every now and then. So I always thought it wouldn't go on forever. But at the same time, we're producing now video series. We're in the middle of recording a giant renovation from a tenant moving out to renovating to a tenant moving back in, and actually working on a new series called Doors and Pours with another real estate investor. So she'll sort of talk about her experience from a female perspective. I'll talk about it from a male perspective, and it's geared towards helping folks that are sort of past their first year of investing, or they have one or two properties, but now trying to go from 2 properties to 10 properties. So sort of long answer to that question, as I didn't think House Hacking Podcast would go on forever, but I thought I would be producing content in some form to help folks for quite a long time.
Yeah, and that probably is a natural thing to have transition from one medium or one type of piece of content to another over time. I did have another question about your guests, and I should have asked it earlier. I missed it. You talk a lot of specific numbers with your guests, like about how much their properties cost, what they're earning, things that some people might shy away from discussing in a normal conversation, particularly with a stranger, particularly with someone that, they're being recorded. How do you approach that sort of a topic with your guests beforehand? Do you discuss beforehand? Do you discuss expectations with them? Have they been reluctant to do that?
Yeah. So part of that is, luckily the first season was harder. Now that we've got seasons out, people can listen to episodes and they sort of know what to expect. But I would send over a list of those common questions, and some people would be a little bit reluctant. And I think that's just some of the culture in America, is where you don't necessarily talk about sex, politics, religion, and money.
Yeah.
So there people will be a little bit hesitant to talk about it. And the way I always approach it is, look, what we're going to talk about is all generally public information. So if someone really wants to know, what you bought your house for, while you might not be comfortable sharing for it, I can find it in 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. It's public.
It's public records. There's a tax record on it. Yes, you may be hesitant to talk about what the property is going to rent for, but now there's so many resources out there. If you posted it for rent in the past, that listing's out there on the web. Or there's resources that can say, hey, this neighborhood, this many bedrooms, bathrooms, here's what the average rent is. So, when I would sort of phrase it with folks, is like, we cannot talk about anything that you want, but I do need answers to, like, what'd you buy it for? What's the type of financing? And then, what's your payment? What are you getting for rent? And that's all sort of public information that's, easily sourced out there. People can find, and, 99% of people are like, hey, that's great. I don't mind talking about it.
What does typical production look like for an episode for your podcast? So from the time that you record the episode to when the podcast gets out to the listeners, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so I use a project management software called Asana. I use that for basically everything under our media company, from website, written articles, to videos, to the actual podcast. So, once we hit record, we do the conversation. I should add, the first 2 seasons were audio only. The third and now the 4th season are both audio and video. So, once I'm done doing the recording, I hit stop, and then I start actually uploading everything. So I have a company based in the UK that does all my audio editing. I simply put it in Dropbox, and then I log into our sort of dashboard and put the notes in there, in the link to download it. And I say, here, put in this advertising spot. Here's the custom intro I recorded. Here's the episode. Here's a custom outro or a mid-roll. I do the same thing, upload a link with the video to our video editor who's in the Philippines. I also have the raw audio for our show notes writer to actually start writing the show notes. And then once everything comes back, my VA starts to compile it and take the show notes, put it up on the website, schedule it out. They'll put it in YouTube to schedule it out. And then we'll put it in our Podbean podcast host to put it out for the release date. And then my VA starts to do social media graphics and stuff around the episode. So we'll cut little short clips that we've thought were really impactful or beneficial and use those for social media. And then when the release day comes for the episode, everything's sort of done.
So you're fairly hands off then, as far as the production side of it goes. After you record the episode, after you have the conversation, you have a team of people that are doing a lot of this additional work for you.
Yeah. It didn't start that way, and nowadays, a lot of the times I won't even go back and review an episode.
I was just going to ask you that. Yeah,
the first draft comes back from the video editor or the audio editor, because we have our show notes writer is going through it and my VA is going through it, and then they'll just flag me of like, hey, there's an issue here, or that this seems a little funny, or the editor will catch something and bring it up. So a lot of the times it's fairly hands off, and that's the way I've tried to build it.
So I am a little bit curious about that. You have a company that does video editing. You have a separate individual or company that does the audio editing.
Yep.
How are you making sure? How are they making sure, if that the the audio and the video sync?
Yep. So I actually record it all. I use Riverside FM. It's a online platform, just like Zoom. It can record an audio and video. It records HD video, and then I use a Rodecaster Pro soundboard, and then Adobe Audition, and I'll record the audio automatically, and then Riverside records backup audio and the video. So my video editor actually will, as he's cutting the video together, it automatically he'll clean up some of the audio. And that audio to me is good enough for YouTube and social media.
Yep.
But to me, it's not high enough quality editing specifically for podcasts, like when you're out in a car. And that's where I use music radio creatives out of the UK to do the podcast editing. And that's specifically their niche. I'm big on hiring experts, right? So a great video editor is not always the best audio engineer, or vice versa. So I use that UK company specifically for the audio version of the podcast that gets pushed out to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, all of those. And then the video editor for all the video clips and what we'll push out on YouTube.
Okay. So that answers my question. And technically then you have two separate versions of the podcast going out. You have one with video that's probably cut slightly different, and one with just audio that's different. I see.
And I actually think it's important to do that, because the way you edit something in video, some folks will just minimize the browser and let the audio go in the background, and that's fine coming out of the computer. But to hold someone's attention on video, you need to insert some graphics or do some different cuts or switching back and forth between who's talking and who's on the screen. And to me, that's a different skill set to meet a different viewer's need versus the audio side of things.
You've made it a point to highlight on your podcast that you have a new show notes page for your episodes. What did you change from the old show notes page to the new one, and why'd you do that?
Yeah, so I'd almost say we're on 3 versions of it. So, the first version was essentially a summary, couple paragraphs, and then I included a transcript. And the idea was, like I'd mentioned beginning of the show, I want to drive traffic to the website, so I need to have some sort of show notes page. Version 2 was, as I started to learn more about SEO and was able to bring on a writer to write my show notes, let me make these a little bit more useful and impactful. Now we're writing a 600 to 800, sometimes 1,000 word blog post that's based around the article. It's a good summary. We're including links and more resources. So, in a show notes page, we'll link to other articles that are useful. So, we had a guest talking about the house hacking leapfrog strategy. We had an article that we actually wrote about that. So we included a link to that article. And the goal with that was, could we make those show notes pages more useful so more people would go there? So there's sort of the business side of it. But then also I wanted to, as I learned more about SEO and understood it better, is can we write this blog post to get more organic traffic? So, I think we're still ranked in the top 1 to 3 spots. So if you type in like house hacking in New York City or house hacking NYC, that show notes page comes up usually in the top 3 spots. And
Wow.
there's not a ton of searches for that, but that usually puts 100 people to the website a month
Yeah.
to that specific show notes page. And that's a way we've helped grow traffic to the website and helped grow the show. So they'll go to that show notes page and then they'll read the blog post and skim it and then be like, okay, now let me go listen to the episode. So that was sort of the second version. And then the third version, we redesigned the graphics for the page. So we're still doing the SEO optimized article, including a lot more links and resources. But then we wanted to do things with some graphics, make the page design better, to do call outs, sort of call to actions for, as an example, a sponsor, or do like a pro tip section. So that way it's more useful to the reader, the listener, and also has higher conversion rates on the website.
And are you still doing a full transcript of the episodes?
No, I dropped that out after sort of that first version. And I think there's a little bit of debate on this, but one of the things that I learned is when Google's algorithm looks through a page, it looks at, an SEO score, and then it also has something called a readability score. So if you dump the transcripts on there, the way we talk isn't the way we write.
Yeah.
So the readability score, I noticed on those show notes pages, was in the dumps, and I felt like that could potentially hurt my organic ranking for those pages. So
Interesting.
I opted to just not do the transcripts anymore, and no one ever complained. No one ever came back to ask me for the transcripts. So I just stopped doing it, and it didn't cost me a lot of money. I was using a service to do the transcripts. It was a couple bucks per episode, but I said, why spend the money if no one misses it and no one is asking for it?
That's interesting because I put full transcripts up on my pages, and the idea has been for SEO purposes, thinking that, if a guest mentions something or we have a conversation about a particular search term that Google would find within the transcript, maybe that would help elevate the organic traffic to the website. But, it seems like it's just like anything in life. You have people telling you one thing, and then somebody else comes and gives you a valid reason for the exact opposite. So, what's the best thing to do? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one of the tools that some of your listeners might like is I use a plugin on my WordPress website called Yoast, Yoast. And the Yoast plugin will actually scan the article or your show notes page and say, hey, here's how it's looking for a keyword or keyword phrase, and here's the readability score. So not only was the readability score really low, it was actually flagging me for like keyword stuffing. So it would be like, your audio, you said house hacking 50 times over an hour and a half. In an article, if that was going to be part of your long tail keyword, you wouldn't have it in there so many times.
Yeah, so maybe you're getting penalized.
Yeah, so I don't know a true right answer, but I found it saved me a couple bucks by not having to use a transcription service. And then, I also realized my time on, one of the things you can track is how long people spend on the page. And I noticed as we built out a longer article and then we did the graphic update to the show notes page, our time on the show notes pages has continually increased, even with us taking out those transcripts. So maybe if I were to add those transcripts back in, people would stay even longer. It's something I could always test. But again, I don't know 100% what the right answer is.
Yeah. How are you driving growth to your podcast?
One was just sort of, we talked about optimizing those show notes pages for
SEO
or SEO, right? So, we'll try any major city like house hacking Seattle, house hacking New York, house hacking Chicago. Then we'll also, when we have guests come on that have a bigger audience themselves, we've been fortunate to build some good relationships with folks that have 70, 100,000 subscribers on YouTube where they've come on our show. So we'll specifically optimize that page around their name and real estate or house hacking. So when someone types in, that YouTuber's name, obviously their stuff's coming up, but our show notes page is coming up pretty high as well. When we have folks on from like a property management software or a platform that can help real estate investors, we'll optimize that around SEO for a review of that company. And that's helped us really get organic growth. Then I've also spent a little bit of money on ads for video views on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
You can get, for every episode, what we've tried to produce towards the end of season 3 was we have the main video, and then we'll produce 5 or 6 short video clips that are, 30, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes. So what I'll do is when we post them on social media at the end of the week, whatever one did the best or one or two that did the best, the next week I would actually put a little bit of advertising dollars in
boosting it, or whatever the Facebook calls it.
Those. Yeah. Yep. And specifically would target them to, people interested in personal finance and real estate investing. So, it's sort of a, hey, here's 6 clips that I think are interesting and people get value out of. Out of those 6, here's the ones that people actually like the most. And then I would boost those to a new audience. And then that would help get additional views, get page likes and follows. Costs have gone up a little bit, but, you could get like 2, 3, 4 cents video views on, Facebook for those short 60-second clips. And, it doesn't take much, $5 or $10, and you can get tons of views on those videos. And if you have a good call to action on that post, and it's something that's useful and interesting, we ended up getting some good traffic out of those.
And can you tie that back directly to the boosted post? Like I know Facebook has I think they call it the Facebook Pixel that you can install on your website, and that kind of will track users across Facebook's properties that also visit your website. Is that what you're using to do that?
Yep. So Facebook, hate them and both love them at the same time.
Yeah,
but their ad
hate them as a person
awesome.
and love them as a business.
Yeah, because it'll literally say like, here's how many people saw this boosted post. Here's how many engaged with it. Here's how many watched 3 seconds of the video. Here's how many watched 25% of the video. Here's how much watched 50%, 75%. Here's how many watched 90% of the video. Very few watch 100% because they know when the video is about to end, so they click off. But they have all that data. Then they say, here's how many people went to the website, or whatever the main action was out of it. And the Facebook Pixel lets you track people going to your website. So to me, it's been a great resource to help sort of broaden the audience of the show.
Do you use any sort of listener stats to kind of make any decisions about what types of episodes you're going to put out? Or are you just, we're going to interview people and, whatever they have to say, we'll find that interesting and run with it?
Yeah, so some of that has just been a little bit of my gut of what do I think an interesting perspective would be, especially during the first and second season when it was sort of newer. And then as I start to notice, I could test different headlines for podcasts, and that would sometimes help. But we could look at, the average listen, and then I would try to gather out of like, okay, why did this episode do double what all the other ones did? And I would go back and listen to it 2 or 3 times. I'd look at the headline, the description, to try to distill some information out of that. But what I found that seemed to work really well for me was this sort of, I don't want to call it like Goldilocks thing, like right size, but I specifically started in season 3 was try the strategy of small guest, medium guest, big guest, small guest, medium guest, big guest. And the idea was there's someone out there that literally will only have 50 people on Instagram, but they have an amazing story. So they're not going to help really, if they share it, they're going to share it to their 50 followers that are family and friends, and only 1 or 2 might listen to the episode. That's not going to get me a lot of, growth. But my existing audience will love that story. Then there's the medium folks where they're trying to grow a brand or they're trying to grow a following, and they have a pretty good story, and then they can share it. And then there's the bigger folks where some of them won't take the time to share, and they feel like they're doing you a favor to be on your show. But it's such a big name where just by having their name in the title is going to get you a lot of views. So that approach of trying to go between small, medium, and big guest and rotating between those 3 really, I felt, gave me a lot of good growth as well. And I sort of distilled that strategy from some of the listener stats from the first 2 seasons.
Yeah, I like that. As hopefully as this podcast grows, I can start making some of those sort of conscious decisions. At this point, I'm kind of taking everybody that comes and says they want to be on the show, which is great. I love it.
We all start there, right? Unless
Yeah.
you're well known, it's hard to get those first guests for season 1.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you, jumping on and talk to me. I'm sure you're on the bigger guest side of things, so
I would say medium,
that.
but
Medium, okay.
No problem, man. I love helping folks out, especially content creators in the podcast or video space.
What is the technical setup that you're using for your podcast? What kind of? I know you said Adobe Audition. You're recording your audio in.
Yeah.
What about your microphone, headphones, computer, any of that?
Am I allowed to say it's changed over time?
Absolutely. That's the follow-up question. How's it changed?
Yeah, part of it was, again, when I was distilling that information, bad audio was something that turned folks off. So I said, great, post-production, I'll outsource to an expert. So let me spend a little bit more money on stuff. I've got Rodecaster Pro for the soundboard. It's hooked up to my computer. We record everything right into Adobe Audition. I originally used Zoom to interface with guests. I use Riverside now, but my Rodecaster Pro, I can actually plug my phone right into it. So if a guest wants to call in, they can do a phone call in if we want. And then I sort of had that as my main setup. And then I added a Canon EOS R, sort of a higher end mirrorless camera that can record in HD to record the video side of it. And then as I started doing video, I started adding like a key light, a fill light, a backlight. And then when we moved into the property we're in right now, when we were renovating it, I actually stuffed all the walls in my office with a sound dampening insulation. And then I started to get the art that you could print pictures on this canvas that had sort of sound isolation and deadening in it. So
I think I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, look around my room. There's all the pictures actually have that special sound absorption in it to reduce reverb and echo. And then I have some other sound blocks in specific spots just to help kill out some of that reverb in echo in the room.
You said the Rodecaster Pro is your mixing board. What about the microphone? What microphone are you using?
It's the Rode Broadcaster one.
Okay.
I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but I specifically wanted to use a dynamic mic. A condenser mic, what I distilled was it would give you a better quality, but it could pick up, the phrase I always kept hearing is like it could hear a mouse fart, a mile away. So unless you had a actual real studio, a condenser mic was challenging to go with because it meant more work on the post-production side. Not necessarily bad, but so I've always gone with the dynamic mic.
Yeah, I had I'm on a Rode Pod mic now. I did 2 episodes with the Rode Podcaster. I can't remember. It's the step up from this microphone. I think I got a bad copy of it though because it sounded super compressed and there was a lot of artifacts on my voice. So I sent it back and got this one. It's cheaper and I think it sounds great. So I'm happy with that. You said your gears changed over the years. Did you have a different microphone when you started?
Yeah, so I had a portable, it was like that AT1200 USB mic.
Okay, just straight into the computer.
Yeah, so you could plug it into your computer and you could also, plug it right into the Rodecaster Pro board. I guess it was maybe the first 5 episodes and some of my test episodes. We just recorded directly into the computer while I was getting everything else set up. And then all the sound paneling and insulation was something that happened starting in season 3.
Nice.
One of the other things I added, I guess 2 little things. One is I noticed I have a lot of that air popping, lip smacking. So I added a wind filter on my mic, even though I'm indoors. And I found that helped me. And then as I moved into the new property, I added on I forget what it's called. It's the little cage you can put your mic in to stop any vibrations.
Yeah.
So like I'll get excited and start bouncing my knee and then it shakes the floor and shakes the desk and then shakes the mic. So that was something that I noticed where that little bit of a vibration could sometimes be picked up. And where I added that little cage that holds the mic, it was like $30. It just helped sort of step up the audio a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm blanking on what that's called too, but it's some kind of suspension thing.
Yeah, a little suspension harness rig. Yeah.
I'm sure everybody listening is going, it's called this, and they're just like screaming it. But yeah.
Well, Chris, you can put it in your show notes or your description,
Okay.
what it actually is.
Okay. You end your episodes with a segment called The Famous Six. How did you decide on those questions?
Yeah, so some of it was what I thought would be interesting to guests and what I thought was interesting to me. We obviously want to produce a show that's valuable for the listeners, but we got to have fun while we're doing it. And, I love traveling. So obviously I was going to ask, two of the questions were going to be based around traveling. The first two, personal finance book and then real estate book or resource. It actually started as a book, and then I turned it into, book, blog, podcast, resource, because I wanted to start to highlight other people that were creating great content to help folks, and use that as a way to, here's two things that I think are really fun. Travel, where have you been? It sort of talks about people's characteristics. Like, we had one guest was like, oh my God, I would never go anyplace international, but I've been to like 40 state parks. And I'm like, that is so cool. And then, other folks that are like, oh, I've done a trip to North Korea. And I'm like, that's really cool too.
Yeah.
So you sort of learn about a different side of someone than maybe what we covered in the show, where those first two, personal finance, real estate. And then, the bucket list thing is sort of life's bigger than money and personal finances. We need money to get by. It's a huge part of life, but what's something aspirational we want to do? And that sort of, to me, I thought was interesting. It goes back to that curiosity about people. And then, something fun, like some of the stuff people bring up, I'm like, that's really cool. Like you get to learn about who that person is. And I thought listeners would enjoy that.
Well, I'm not going to leave my listeners hanging. So if you're up for it, I'd like to ask you your own famous 6 questions as we near the end of this episode.
Oh man! So you sent me prep questions, but I don't remember reading those ones in there.
They were not in there. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, shoot. Let's see what I can come up with.
Number 1, what is your favorite personal finance related resource?
Yeah. So, man, this is a really good one. I love the Choose 5 podcast, especially those first 100 episodes. I've referred that show over to folks to so many different folks, and not just go listen to the show, but they had so many great episodes early on. They're still doing great episodes, but it was so easy to pull out 1, 2, 3 episodes and say, hey, this is exactly where you're at in your life. You need to listen to this episode. Or, hey, you're a teacher. This episode has on a teacher that's a multimillionaire through maximizing all the retirement plans available to teachers. So it's just been, for me, a huge personal finance resource and one that I really recommend to folks.
What is your favorite real estate related resource?
Yeah, nowadays it's YouTube. I mean, there's so many great content creators and great real estate investors that are documenting their stories online that, depending where someone's at, if they're trying to get into wholesaling or flipping or buy and hold, there's great shows that I'll recommend for folks on there.
Okay, question 3. What has been, I have it written down, what has been your favorite travel destination so far?
There's so many. Probably Petra in Jordan. Ever since being an older millennial, Indiana Jones was something I grew up watching with my dad and then my younger brother. And that, I think it's that 3rd episode when they're going in to find the goblet chalice thing. It was actually filmed in Petra, Jordan, and we went there in 2019, and it was just beautiful country, but phenomenal. Going and walking up to the treasury is just amazing. Italy's probably my default go-to. I've been 5 times. I'm going back in this weekend, so that's always the country I keep going back to. But probably right now, favorite is Petra in Jordan.
And what is next on your travel vacation list? Italy this weekend? Where in Italy are you going?
Yeah, so it'll be Milan, London, and then Vienna. So going for a couple different things, meeting up with some friends, potential nonprofit that is looking to bring me on board. And then we're looking at down the road some economic visa opportunities where if you invest in real estate in other countries, they basically give you a green card for a couple of years that you can renew. So it would be a way for us to go live in Europe without having to leave every 90 days to renew a tourist visa.
You just got to buy one of those dollar houses that they have in Italy.
I mean, those are pretty attractive. But, now they even have, so many of them are doing telecommuting and freelance visas where you can come for a year if you prove you have, income and you can work remotely.
Nice.
So there's just a lot of opportunity, I think, to move around and have more freedom that I would say is a silver lining out of the COVID crisis.
All right, question 5. What is your biggest bucket list item that you have not accomplished yet?
Raising that $25 million for charity.
Getting close. And then question number 6. What is your favorite life hack?
LastPass. And I actually learned about LastPass from the ChooseFi guys.
Yeah.
I think it was like one of their questions, or I can't remember how it came up, but especially everyone has tons of passwords. But then as I started building out the website and the podcast, and it got up to where I had like 200 or 300 passwords from all these different things. And then, shopping websites and Amazon. And I'm like, everything was the same or a slight variation. And then LastPass stores it all and you can create unique passwords. That right now is usually my constant life hack that just makes life easier for me.
Yeah, I used to use LastPass. It was great, and then I'm cheap, so they started charging for something, and I jumped ship to Bitwarden, which is free and open source, but same thing.
Cool.
Password manager, fantastic. Everybody should absolutely have one. By the way, thank you for doing that. That was not on the prepared questions list, and I definitely kind of just thought it would be fun to see what your answers were. I don't know if anybody's had the opportunity to ask you your own questions yet. So
no, that's a first. So you caught me off guard, but it was fun.
Yeah. What's one of the most important lessons that you've learned about podcasting since you started making your show?
The quality of the audio makes a really big difference as far as the user experience, and then personally was my audio and verbal tics. I used awesome so much. A lot of people use the and ums.
Yeah.
I've tried to reduce those, but the awesome was something that anytime I thought something was interesting or exciting, I'm like, that's so awesome. That's so awesome. So that was something personally I learned I needed to cut out of my vocabulary.
I have a number of those that I'm aware of that I try to handle as I'm going through this, that I've noticed, as I'm interviewing people, but it's hard to not just fall back on them. And I don't want to shout them out in case it becomes something grating to people as they listen.
Well, worst case, if people, you can always joke, people can make a drinking game out of it, right? So figure out what our audio tics or verbal tics are as podcast hosts, and then, listen to our episodes, in the evening, and, take a shot every time I say awesome too much or whatever yours are.
Is there anything else that we should talk about? Did we miss anything that you wanted to cover?
No, I think we really covered everything. Maybe one sort of closing point I'd want to say is, as folks start your podcast, look at different ways to monetize it. I was fortunate to get a sponsor for the last half of my 3rd season, and then for the launch of my 4th season. I actually never thought I would get a sponsor for the show, but there's so many different ways you can monetize your podcast, whether that's selling a digital product you create, using affiliate links, or actually finding a sponsor. But I actually specifically didn't look for any sponsorships, and then opportunities came to me once I got into that 3rd season, and they were folks that I had actually been doing business with. One of my really good affiliate programs is it's called Easy Landlord Forms. When I started talking with them, I was like, I've been using you for a while. Can you actually look up when I made my account? And they're like, Andrew, you've been using us since like 2013. Like you're one of our longest continuous customers. And they're like, you're approved. Like, no problem. Like we want you in the program.
Yeah.
And I just found like, hey, this is a resource that I've been using as a real estate investor. So whatever your niche is, figure out the tools in companies and programs that you use and help make your life easier. And then C, go to their website and scroll all the way down the bottom. And a lot of them will say affiliate program or affiliates, and click on that. And that could be a great way to help monetize your podcast.
I think that's a great point to make. And, it's good to remind people that just because you're trying to monetize your podcast doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be a business. If you get a couple $100 a month, that could go a long way towards a new microphone or soundproofing your room or whatever it is. And, figuring out a way to make the podcast more sustainable to continue maybe through that monetization is always a good thing.
Well, how about this? If you don't like this, Chris, you can cut it out in post-production. If you do like it, look up whatever the cage thingy is I'm talking about, and you can put an Amazon affiliate link. So if folks are loving your show, Chris, they can go to the show description and click that affiliate link. Doesn't cost them any more money, but it helps support you and your show.
Appreciate that, yeah. Affiliate link in the show notes below or wherever you're listening.
Of the suspension cage thingy that we can't remember the name of.
Thingy. I'll call the link that too. Where can people find you? Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, so the House Hacking Podcast is easy to find us on all the social media. We have the handles, and then obviously in Spotify, Apple Podcast, and then our website's fibrei.com.
Great. Andrew, thank you so much for hopping on with me and, sharing about your podcast and, letting people know what you got going on. I really appreciate it. I had a ton of fun. I think I learned a lot about house hacking and about making podcasts. You're doing stuff differently than a lot of the guests that I've had on, but it seems like you put a lot of thought into it, and that's, it makes a lot of sense to me. So thanks for sharing all of that with me and with my guests.
Yeah, no problem, Chris. It was great coming on the show with you.
That was my conversation with Andrew Kerr, founder of Phi by RIA, real estate investor, nonprofit director, and host of the House Hacking Podcast, which can be found on all of the major podcast networks. You can also find Andrew at fibrei.com. That's FIBYREI.com. My name is Chris Cookley, and you can find me at whomakesapodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be an enormous help if you shared it with your friends or left a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. And if you host a podcast and would like to be my next guest on Who Makes a Podcast, let me know. Go to whomakesapodcast.com/guest and tell me about your show. This is Who Makes a Podcast. I'll be back next time with another conversation with another incredible podcast host. Thanks for listening.